Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and welcome to 98.3 The Vibe Special Edition I.M.A.G.E TV Podcast. Those of you joining us by YouTube, those of you joining us by satellite, again, we encourage you, those of you joining us by YouTube, to get out there and subscribe. The numbers continue to rise. The views continue to grow up. And we want to thank you because you are tuned in to America's #1 reentry channel. There is nowhere on YouTube where you can go to catch a reentry show, to catch live action. I mean, this is great. Des Moines, Iowa, we've got a lot going on. Get out there and vote. There's a lot of canvassing going on. We've got jobs through the I.M.A.G.E program. There's going to be a Evelyn K. Davis Center Job Fair coming up again on the 28th of October from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. I mean, we've got a lot of action. I've got a great guest to announce. Ladies and gentlemen, I have Tony Muhammad in the house with me to my right. Tony Muhammad, we're going to talk about his story. We're going to talk with Ken Silver, our co-host here. And ladies and gentlemen, we've talked about black on black crime. We've went into it. We've talked about parole and probation officers. We've talked a lot about all of the stuff that's going on in our community. We've talked about a lot of negative things as far as the disasters that are going on. And so today we're going to talk about the success.
One of the things we identified when we talked about black on black crime was the fact that people didn't have any hope. They didn't have any self-esteem. And the reason they didn't have any self-esteem is because they weren't successful at anything. And so we want to start talking about success here at I.M.A.G.E. And success comes in a lot of different ways. You may be talking about success in your job or your career. You may want some success in overcoming an addiction or some type of a criminal activity, maybe even personal relationships. We talk sometimes about people that have health problems, overweight, or they want to improve their physique and work out. But we would like to talk to you people about the success that you would like to acquire. Give us a chance to provide resources to get that success. And if you've had success in overcoming things, let us know so we can get you on the show. We want this to be upbeat. We want to be a positive influence on the community. And today, we've got a great example of success. And Bobby, you know more about Tony than I do, but I think he's going to be a great example, and I can't wait to hear his story.
Well, I tell you, I'm excited as well. Now, I've never really had a chance to meet you, Tony. But ladies and gentlemen, Tony Muhammad is on the I.M.A.G.E show. We welcome you. We thank you for coming on the show. And we want to learn just a little bit more about you. I mean, obviously, you were one that has been a statistic of one that has not been, obviously, you're one that is a statistic of one that's not accumulated to the recidivism rate.
Right.
And for those of you who do not know what recidivism is, it's when you go back into the institution. Now, Tony, can you just tell us, first of all, take us back. Where are you from?
I'm originally from Des Moines, Iowa. And again, thank y'all for having me. I'm originally from Des Moines, Iowa. I was born here. I kind of have a unique, diverse background. One of the, just to take you back to the beginning, it didn't begin in crime. That was never how my life was designed to go. But what happened was, there were several things that occurred in the African American community, in the Black community, if you will. One of those things was, by the time I reached my adolescence, drugs were introduced. Before that time, if you remember, there was this real high nationalistic theme of being Black conscious. That somehow got derailed with the drug epidemic coming into the inner cities. And when that happened, I had a good base, a self-identity, a little bit of self-awareness, self-education, because I was homeschooled a lot by one of my uncles who was real big into that. And, he was with the Black Revolutionary Army. He taught us a lot about being prideful. He taught us a lot about being doing for self. But what happened was, again, when the drugs came into the community, he got addicted to the drugs. As you know, one of my uncles was probably the biggest drug dealer in the state. And who
was that?
That was my uncle Freddie Clark.
Freddie Clark.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
And so I came up under my uncle's tutelage. About 13 years of age is when the federal government began investigating our case. So I have a case going all the way back to the time that I was 13. So I got introduced to drugs, not on the lower scale that people get introduced to drugs, peddling drugs on the corner. I was actually seeing kilos of cocaine coming in, being cooked up into crack, being broken down, and being distributed. And I was a big part of that distributing process as a young person. And I was, I guess, one of the essential figures of running my uncle's business, because even though I was young, I didn't have any habits, and I was real reliable. And plus, I was not self-educated, but I was homeschooled. And I was educated and trained in a way that my uncle wanted me to be trained. And so I was really his right-hand man. He depended on me because he had instilled in me certain ethics, work ethics. Even though it was attributed to narcotics, it was still a work ethics. Be the first one on the block hustling, be the last one to leave. So you didn't want to leave any money out there. And that's how we gained that kind of success so fast. Most people were just hustling because they wanted some new shoes. Most people were hustling because they wanted a car to impress that girl. We was hustling because it was a career. We was running it like a business. We looked after it like a business. We took it serious like a business. And so when things didn't go according to how that business plan was laid out, then some of the stories of the repercussions that come down the pipe after that. And so that brought a lot of heat. That brought the government of the United States and Iowa particularly frowned upon us, and they began to aggressively investigate us because they looked at us as a serious threat, and rightly so. Because we were serious. We wasn't playing about this. And if somebody came up and set up shop, the story, we knocked on your door. Did you pay to be here? Because if you didn't pay to be here, you got no right to be here. We expect you to be out of here,
Right. So let me ask you. So you're telling us this story. Now, this is a really interesting story because a lot of people don't know this. And we're going to go to a quick break. But when we come back, we're going to hear more about Tony Muhammad and his story. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to the Image Show, an Image TV podcast on 98.3 The Vibe Early Morning Show Special Edition. We'll be back after these messages. And we've got a great guest on the show today. Ladies and gentlemen, with us in the house is Tony Muhammad to my right. And of course, we all know Ken Silver to my left. Tony, first of all, you've been one that has actually been a great statistic for one that has not contributed to going back to prison and being just one of those statistics. And so I want to first of all say thank you for that. I don't know what your magic sauce or secret ingredient was, but there's a lot of brothers that look up to you, a lot of brothers and sisters that look up to you for that. And so can you just tell us just a little bit about what that took to be able to stay free and some things that you learned in prison?
It took God and humility, because I always had a respect for authority. I always had a respect for my elders. I've always been taught to respect people who know more than you, regardless to whether or not they had, I guess, an extensive education. But if they had that experience, if they were here before you, then they had something to share with you. So take your time and hear them out. And because of that, that had been my saving grace. I met influential people during my struggles who planted seeds that when I did get incarcerated and I had that quiet time, I could go back and reflect on those seeds that they had planted on me. And I was able to water those seeds and let those seeds grow through patience. And that was one of the things that had pushed me through.
Amen. Well, I'll tell you, I appreciate you. Me and Ken both appreciate you for acknowledging God and putting him in the forefront of that. Now, I'll tell you, that evil of drugs and crack cocaine that took place in the 80s, it really took a big devastation to a lot of the black on black community in Des Moines. Yes. And you were actually, I remember you were part of that era.
Yes, sir.
And so I know that you have a story that kind of relates to that, just as we all have. I did 11 consecutive years for possession with intent to deliver crack cocaine. It not only broke me down, it changed my heart, changed my life. And I know that for anybody that has spent that much time in prison for something like that, it's a devastating blow. Tell us your story.
Well, I'm surprised that you say that it's devastating. And let me just interject right here for a second, because it wasn't a devastating blow to me. Actually, it was one of the fundamental building blocks that made me stronger, because I've seen prison break people, and the people that get broken usually go back. And those are the ones that go back. But prison didn't break me. Prison educated me. And the reason why I say it educated me, I met, like I was telling you before, pivotal individuals. I met one individual in the federal institution. He was a PhD in psychiatry. And he used to teach at the University of out there in California, but he had a problem with drugs. He was always jumping the bank counters. And he taught a class on recidivism. And one of the things that he asked me, I'm young, I'm cocky, I'm in there with the homies, because we'll get to that in a minute. I'm banging, So I'm in there with the homies, and he said, everybody called me Baby Tony. And the reason why they called me Baby Tony, because there's 5 Tonys in my family, and I happen to be the youngest one. We had everything was taken up. Even little Tony was taken up. So I was the last one. So I was Baby Tony. But he said,
Baby Tony.
He said, Baby Tony, why are you so comfortable here? And I said, well, all of the homies is here. All of my friends here. He said, he asked me a question. He said, what do you think about these young boys coming in here that's crying? I said, oh man, they just weak. They can kill themselves. We'd be better off without them. And that's just how I was. I was kind of callous. And he said, listen, let me stop you right there. He said, that's a sociopathic mentality. And at the time, I didn't know what sociopathic meant, and I didn't know what he was referring to. And because I'm thinking, I'm not Michael Myers, I'm not Jason Voorhees, I'm not a homicidal maniac. But he said, no, you don't have any affinity or empathy to somebody's emotional responses to their personal experience that says that anything that happens that is not normal is traumatizing. And the fact that it is not traumatizing for you, you have a social arrested development. So get that out of your life, get that out of you, and get anyone out of your life who thinks like that. So, of course I went back and I thought about it. What does he mean? What is he saying? And over the course of my 14 years incarcerated, I learned intimately what he was saying about being sociopathic. You can have all of the good intentions in the world, but you can still be a sociopath. Some of the biggest sociopaths insert themselves into the therapeutic process of other people's rehabilitation process, think that they're doing good, and because they haven't addressed their own arrested developments and their own inabilities to relate to somebody's emotional response to their personal experience, they can do more harm than good. We see it all of the time. When if you've never been accosted by the police and I've been in trouble and we see somebody getting whooped, our emotional response to witnessing that experience will be different. I may say, there the police go again with that BS. You may say, what did that fool do to make him go upside his head? Neither response is an abnormal response because mine is tied emotionally to that experience, but yours isn't. So it's not a negative response, but it becomes a sociopathic response and a harmful response when you overlap that on an experience that you haven't experienced and you know nothing about. Just like somebody who happened to be a rape victim. You don't tell a rape victim how she should feel because you haven't experienced that. You can talk about it through your education and your study of it, but when you're talking about somebody's emotional response, their intimate response, you have no idea what that person has gone through.
That is great. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is really exciting. For those of you that are joining us right now, we are locked and loaded into a great story. We've got Tony Muhammad, a.k.a. Baby Tony, Ken Silver, Robert Pate. It's the Image Show on 98.3 The Vibe. We'll be back after these messages. Don't change that dial. Des Moines, Iowa. Are you looking for employment? Are you looking for a job? The Evelyn K. Davis Center for Working Families is hosting another career fair. Wednesday, October 28th. Wednesday, October 28th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Hy-Vee Hall, Iowa Event Center, 730 3rd Street, Des Moines, Iowa. Don't miss it. If you need a resume, call 515-697-7700. We'll be there. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. 98.3 The Vibe Early Morning Show Special Edition. We've got Tony Muhammad, a.k.a. Baby Tony, and we've got Ken Silver with us in the house. And so we've talked a lot about, the crack cocaine era. We've talked about, the 80s, the war on drugs and how we've changed our lives, black on black crime. We want to get a little bit more into the gangs now. I.M.A.G.E, I.M.A.G.E, Inmate Movement Against Gang Evolution. We look up to the ones that have, stopped the violence, the ones that have been able to become mentors, the one that live by example, that have full-time jobs, take care of their family, and live productive lives. And so, Baby Tony, you are one of those that is an example of that. And so take us back, though, to the type of life that you used to live and kind of tell us how that kind of develops and why is this so, why does this need to be addressed?
Why does the recidivism need to be addressed or what?
I'm talking about the gangs. Take us back into some gang stories. Tell us a little bit about your gangs, old gang life.
I went back and looked at some of the podcasts that y'all done after you've introduced me to these to this podcast, and you kind of hit you and Mr. Silver kind of hit the nail on the head from both of your perspectives when you talked about how the gangs were for protecting the communities and how Mr. Silver talked about how the old gangs in New York were just violent gangs. And if you want to talk about the nature of gangs, it's you can trace it all the way back to even the plantation during slavery, because violence was a sport associated with slavery. You know how slave owners would get slaves together, they would make them fight, and that would cause resentment even from slaves on other plantations. And people aren't even aware that during those times, even back during slavery, there would be gangs from other slave plantations that would fight other slaves from other plantations, even without the slave master's behest, because it was something that had been instilled in them over centuries of just entertaining and engaging in this sport to entertain slave masters and slave owners. But when you bring it all the way up to the generations where we were a part of it, those sentiments were still enrooted, I guess, ingrained in our communities, where we would organize ourselves according to our likes and our dislikes, basically. Some some gangs are rooted in religious precepts. Some are rooted in just a mob mentality,
Okay.
And so there's different ideas, and there were different motives in the gangs. One of the things that influenced me was you couldn't just be a mobster. You couldn't just be out here, and you just couldn't be grimy. You had to attract me. So when I met the Supreme Chief of the Vice Lords, he was a PhD in theology. This was an educated man. So when he began to talk to me about this gang quote unquote gang culture, which, we refer to as street organizations, he was teaching me so much about myself that his influence, I was, of course, young and impressionable, but his influence was so great that it just caught us up. These people like Willie Lloyd and Jeff Ford and Larry Hoover, these people were huge personalities. These were not men who were shallow. These were not superficial individuals. When you when you met them, you met a huge figure. Like they were stars for us. It was no different than somebody who was infatuated with the pop culture meeting Michael Jackson.
Sure.
So these were our celebrities. And again, when we met them, coupled with, the distribution of distribution of narcotics and the wealth that was coming in,
yes,
and then they take a liking to you, and they see that here's a young man who's got talent. Here's a young man who's got a gift for numbers. He's business minded. He knows how to run this business, and they would gravitate towards you, and then they would bring you in and draw you closer and closer.
Wow. Now, this is so interesting. A lot of times we hear these stories, okay? But if you're not technically gang affiliated, you get bits and pieces. But I mean, for someone that's actually lived that life and knows the history of, where this stuff kind of originated and started from, I just think it's great. Now, Ken, you haven't said anything all night.
You don't give me a chance.
Well, are you going to say something, Ken?
I'm getting ready to really expound on something deep.
Oh, let's hear it.
First of all, we've been talking about basically black gangs.
Yes.
And unfortunately, there's something in human nature that makes people want to join gangs, period.
Yes.
It doesn't matter, if it's a Latino gang, if it's the Hells Angels motorcycle gang, if it's a gang based on your geographic area, it's my neighborhood gang, my high school gang. Yeah. I don't know what makes people want to join a gang. Sometimes they say, well, it's for my own protection. I don't feel comfortable without a bunch of other guys here to help me. Right. I think there's got to be more than that.
Yes.
And it just intrigues me. The thing that worries me is, how do we get these young kids to stop it? You talked about a couple things that were important in your early life.
Yes.
One was family.
Family.
Now, maybe your family didn't teach you exactly the right thing, but they did teach you a lot of basics that were very important in your later life. The other thing that surprised me is you talked about how much you learned in prison that was good.
Yes.
You learned about yourself.
Yes.
And, too many people come out of prison, they didn't learn anything except something bad and get a chip on their shoulder, and they just want to go out and start more problems. So I think there's two key things that you brought up. The other thing, when you talked about the leader, I think we've got to be careful of these people. Charismatic, they call it. I don't care if you're a TV preacher that scream and holler, if you're a guy that has a cult down in Oklahoma. Yeah. There are certain people that seem to attract others to follow them, and especially young, impressionable people.
Yeah.
So the whole gang concept is something really, really weird.
Yes.
And like I say, these kids that getting involved today really bother me. It scares me for one thing, but I just see a waste of humanity.
It is.
And one of my questions is, was it difficult to just leave the gang? Was there pressure from them for you to stay? Did you have a kind of an inferior feeling to get away, or an insecure feeling to get out of there? Or tell me about that.
That's a good question, Mr. Silver. And it's essential to anybody who feels like they're trapped in a gang. One of the things, though, I never felt trapped to begin with. It was family to me. And sometimes it's the only family that somebody has. And as you said before, everybody has this deep desire to belong to something. Even if you look in Corinthians, I believe it is in the New Testament, it says, you know that you passed from death into life because you love the brotherhood. And that's believe it or not, them men have love for one another. And one of the things that leads to violence, because they say, as they say, violence begets violence. If somebody does something to you, Mr. Silver, and me and you are close, and I got that love for you, I'm not going to rest until I retaliate. And that's right. What makes that cycle, that's what makes that cycle continue. But when I was committed, and everything that I do, I try to do I don't know if you're familiar with Wallace D. Wattles. I was introduced to one of his books, and it was called The Science of Being Great when I was real young. And like I said, I met real educated people when I was incarcerated. And he says that do small things in a great way. Yes. So no matter what I did it in a great way. I tried to do it in a great way. And so that caused me to elevate in the organization that I was a part of. I got those stars on my shoulder. So those stars recognized me throughout the United States of America. And I could go into any institution in the federal joint and get that same recognition. And they knew that, they would have care packages for me when I got off the bus or if I got off the plane, and I would be received with so much love. But what I had to consider was it wasn't that I didn't like the organization or the brotherhood. I began to understand, and I had to weigh, am I doing these young men who are looking up to me more harm than good by allowing this to continue to exist in the manner that it's existing? And so one of the biggest conflicts that I had was in on the leadership level with other brothers who were beginning to see things like I saw things and they wanted this cycle to stop. We wanted to find some way to close this door so that these young men were not continuing to come into prison. And so the break was easy for me. It wasn't hard because I had men who began to think like that. But there were other men who preyed on these young boys. They were getting money. They were hustling for them. They didn't want to let that authority go because they didn't know nothing else. And it's hard to let your prestige go. It's hard to let your stars go. It's hard to let that fame go and put yourself on a level with every other man and say that we brothers. One day you may be the big brother because you may know something more than I do about this. And the other day I might be a big brother, even though I'm younger than you, because I'm more experienced in this particular endeavor. And because that was the new push, then a lot of the old guard began to fight with us. And in the federal institution, it was a huge falling out because of that.
So when you were released from prison, did your connections with the gang help you or hinder you? Was there an advantage once you got out? Were there people that could help you because of the gang affiliation? Or
There was, and it was this. I had garnered enough respect by the grace of God that when I began to try to do, I was, we were making, $50,000, $60,000 a week. And I went from that to making, in prison, making 35 cents a day, 75 cents a day. So when I came home, I was already humbled enough by the prison experience to work that $7 an hour, a job when I came home eight years ago to build myself up and going back to school. But one thing that the gang did do for me was the street organization did do for me. I had garnered enough respect where they said, leave that man alone. Don't nobody go near that man while he's trying to do the right thing. Leave that man alone. And
Tell me about the steps you took. Right now, you're a very successful man, I understand. Sir. What were the steps you took when you were released from prison to get to where you are today?
When I came home, I immediately went to work. That was the first thing that I did because, not idle hands is the devil's workshop. Yes. And I was getting I was sorely tempted because, you have people that are doing well and you know that you can make a phone call and somebody can drop that bag and you can go right back out there and, you can be doing well again. But I made a commitment to God, because when something had happened when I was incarcerated, where I hurt a man, and I was in solitary confinement for about 3 years, and fortunately the man didn't die. He was, he made it through, but that gave me a long time to think.
That's a long time in solitary.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Ladies and gentlemen, you're tuned into 98.3 The Vibe, special edition. We're going to go to a commercial. When we come back, we're going to wrap up this podcast. This is podcast number 11, and we are into some deep stuff. We've got Tony Muhammad, a.k.a. Baby Tony, Ken Silver, and Robert Pate. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, on the Image Show, 98.3 The Vibe, early morning show, Image TV podcast. And we've got Tony Muhammad, a.k.a. Baby Tony, with us. And this story that we've been into has just been marvelous. I mean, it's been educational, it's been uplifting, and it's been inspirational. So, Tony, I want to say thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for making the sacrifice to come on here.
Thank you guys for having me.
Entertain everybody. Now, if you were to wrap up in a few words, for those of you out there that may be listening, if you're young teenagers and if they're in prison, if they're in Mitchellville, what would be your advice to those, and what would be your short story to those out there listening right now who have been caught up into the lifestyle of gangs and all the stuff that we've been talking about?
I would tell them to be flexible. One of the things that allowed me to be successful was to be flexible. I didn't get caught into a lot of rigidness, whether it was religious doctrine, whether it was release programs. I didn't allow myself to get boxed into anything. I was flexible enough to use my own discernment. And because I was able to use my own discernment, I knew what was good for me and what was not. A lot of people have a lot of hopes and dreams for you, but you have to sit back and reflect on what are your own hopes and dreams, because people will see somebody who has potential, see somebody who has talent, and they'll say, let me take this person for my own ends. But you got to remember what your ends is, what your personal desires is. So you have to most of us, just like yourself, you're a self-made man. You came home, even though you had to check the box, you still developed a methodology to work around anything that was opposing you, any opposition or any obstacle in your way. And you developed your own methodology to get to where you're at today. Just like no different than me, no different than Mr. Silver in his own way. And so that's what we have to do. We have to remember that you have to develop your own methodology sometimes to get there.
I hear you talking about flexibility, but the thing that strikes me about what you're saying, self-discipline.
Yes, sir.
Tremendous self-discipline to do what you thought you needed to do, to get the job for $6 or $7 an hour instead of doing it the easy way.
Yes, sir.
To go ahead and get more education, to get rid of your old playmates and on. And I just don't think anybody can underestimate the value of self-discipline in a person's life. You said early on that you were taught respect.
Yes, sir.
And I think that's another key, too. So
it is.
Thank you very much.
Thank y'all for having me. I enjoyed it.
We need to have about a 3-hour show here so we can finish this.
I agree. Hey, this was wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you out there who have had the opportunity to join us this morning, we want to say thank you. For those of you out there on YouTube, we want to say thank you. Continue to get these views up and get people out there listening to Education, America's #1 re-entry show, the Image TV podcast, and 98.3 The Vibe early morning show special edition. And as we've always said about the time right now, at the end, it's a wrap.